Welcome to Supply Circles, stories from the innovators, disruptors and improvers in supply chain management today. Brought to you by AI Group.
Hello, I'm James Scotland, coming to you today from Gunggangji country, and this is Supply Circles, the business improvement podcast that asks the question, how can we in Australia create supply chains that are resilient and sustainable at a time when we're implementing the challenges of the 3 Ds? Digitalisation, to keep up with your peers in your industries, to find urgently needed efficiency improvements, and to meet the needs and expectations of your buyers. Decarbonisation, to meet your legal requirements and targets by 2050, and in some states even earlier. And diversification, the need to build a broader business base that is not overly dependent on any single relationship, whether for a product, a technology, a supply chain, or an export market. Each fortnight, I delve into different sections of the end-to-end supply chain. I chat with fascinating and interesting people, and we try to have some fun along the way. Now, anyone listening who's involved in procurement or employment or working in structured supply chains will be aware of the reasonable requirement for businesses in Australia to engage with the Indigenous economy as much as possible. Many businesses have Indigenous engagement plans and strategies. It's a critical part of the Australian supply chain network, or the supply chain structures. So let's explore the issue today. Today's episode is being released on Friday, the 31st of May, the Friday of National Reconciliation Week. For those who don't know, National Reconciliation Week in Australia is held annually on the last week of May and is, and I quote, a time for all Australians to learn from our shared histories, cultures and achievements, and to explore how each of us can contribute to achieving reconciliation in Australia. This year, the theme of this year's National Reconciliation Week is now more than ever. It's a reminder to all Australians to continue the fight for justice and the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The Australian Industry Group and this podcast actively supports National Reconciliation Week and the ideal it aims to achieve. So with that as background, I'm delighted to say that today's guest is going to talk to me about such things. We're going to talk about Indigenous procurement and supply chains in general. We're going to talk about lots of stuff. He's going to be a great guest. It's my friend Daniel Joinbee. Daniel is a successful businessman in the aerospace, construction and resource industries. He's had a varied career, including time in the Air Force, time with the Australian government overseas. He's been a project manager of large projects, and he's been a business development manager. He spent time on the demand side and the supply side of supply chain. He's a father and a husband, and underpinning all of that, and perhaps connecting all of it into a coherent life story, he's a proud Gunggangji man. It's a delight to have him on the show. Hello, Daniel. Happy Reconciliation Week.
G'day, James. Thank you. Happy Reconciliation Week.
Now, I'm hopeless with words. I'm just not good at things. I try and get it right. You're the managing director of Gunggangji Aerospace. First off, is that the right way of saying it?
Great.
And what is Gunggangji Aerospace?
Yeah, there's a couple of different ways you can announce it. So there's Gunggangji Aerospace, which is the way it sort of naturally rolls off the tongue. And when you're talking to mob up in far north Queensland, so Gunggangji is descendants of the people from Yarrabah. So if you're standing in Cairns and you're looking out over the beautiful mountain ranges across towards the Great Barrier Reef, across that country over there is Yarrabah. And so you'll often hear mob up there sort of describe it as Gunggangji as well. So it has a bit of a K sound to the front of it.
I love that country up there. There's nothing quite like looking out over that scenery. It's just beautiful.
And watching the storms roll in, or those heavy rains where they sit just on top of the mountains, and you can see the storms blow through. I absolutely love that country. So Gunggangji Aerospace was born out of an idea that I didn't want to wait for a prime to win a program for me to be engaged in the aerospace domain. So I was doing some consulting on a program, identified there were no active First Nations enterprises consulting in aviation space, and said, well, as I sort of said, I'm not going to wait for a prime to win a contract. I'm just going to set this up. So I set up Gunggangji Aerospace with, I guess, a vision to raise the horizons of First Nations Australians across Australia, to say, hey, we're out there in some of the most deadly emerging technology, and we have a right and a place to contribute in this space.
Oh wow, that's fantastic. You hear a lot of people sort of saying, "Oh, he's a proud Gunggangji man or a proud Yolngu man." What does that mean? Is it different across the nations, or is it just an expression that means you're a proud Indigenous heritage?
Yeah, I think it means. I mean, to me, I think that's the important part of it as well. Is that everyone's individual. So what the proudness to me is on my story and my journey. And if I reflect on my family's, my Aboriginal family side, so my dad and his grandparents and their story of what happened when Yarrabah Mission was set up and Gunggangji people were pushed off country and a whole bunch of other cultures were brought into the area, that's a story of resilience and survival that I'm really proud of. I'm also really proud of my dad and I guess his journey through life and, you know, meeting my mum and how that all sort of came to be and the stories and experiences that we have together. So I'm proud of my history and my country. But on the other side of that, I'm a proud Australian, someone who served in the Australian Defence Force and someone who at times cries when I drive across the country, right? And I'm looking out the window, whether I'm on the Nullarbor or I'm up in the Torres Strait, and I look out and I go, how beautiful is this country? And I'm so proud to be from it and be a part of it.
Yeah, it's a big country. It's a beautiful country. That wide brown land. I get to travel a fair bit overseas, like most of us do. And when you're flying back, it's amazing. I recently, as listeners know, I recently went to Vietnam, and to get to Vietnam, I flew from Sydney. And 3 hours later, we're still flying across Australia and looking down. And there's the wide brown land below, and then there's this sort of small hop over to Vietnam after you get out of Australia. It's a massive place, and the change is incredible. I mean, I think all of us should have a great pride in our place, and I'm very proud of the fact that our heritage, not my personal heritage, but Australia's heritage, goes back 60,000 years. Staggering.
Yeah, and I think that's the message from National Reconciliation Week, right? It's our shared histories and culture. You know, the First Nations culture is something I feel that we should all be proud of. It's fascinating. I was up in the Torres Strait recently and had the fortunate experience to travel around to some of the outer islands and share that culture. Now, that's not my culture. But I got to listen and understand their close connection to Papua New Guinea and stuff like that, and it was fascinating. But same as I'm a saltwater person, right? I'm from rainforest country, and we've got a real strong connection over east. But when I'm out in Western Australia, say in Karratha or doing work out there, maybe in Maru country, I look out there and I go, you're desert people. You have a whole different experience and stories and bits and pieces like that as well. So I think, as you sort of said, it's our shared history, and it's something I'm proud of from across the country.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Northern Territory, and there's two territories. There's the tropical north and the red centre, and the cultures are totally different. And not only is the land different, but the culture is different. And there's this whole thing about how the land drives the culture and stuff like that. But I think, to every Australian, they should get out and see the different parts of Australia and understand why the culture is different, why there are so many nations.
And it makes sense, right? Like, you don't have to be a scientist to understand that people living by the oceans are going to have a different cultural experience to people living in the desert.
Actually, it's an interesting to say that. I read recently that the ABS says that there's more than 250 Indigenous languages, including 800 dialects. Each language is specific to a particular place and people. In some areas, like Arnhem Land, many different languages are spoken over a small area. And in other areas, like the huge Western Desert, the dialects of one language are spoken across a massive area. It's just staggering. So, this is a supply chain podcast. Can you draw a connection between National Reconciliation Week and supply chains? And do businesses, in your experience, celebrate National Reconciliation Week?
Yeah, so I think to answer the second question, I think businesses definitely acknowledge National Reconciliation Week. There's often a conversation, and that's what I think that these weeks are really good for stoking conversations, whether it's National Reconciliation Week or NAIDOC Week. The idea of getting the word of reconciliation back into everyone's vocabulary is really important. To draw a correlation or a link between National Reconciliation Week and First Nations in supply chains, I think it's the identification or the reconciliation that First Nations enterprises can be just as competitive, just as technically competent and capable to participate in broad-ranging supply chains. And then there's a little bit of Gunggangji aerospace of me poking my head up there, saying, "Hey, there's an Aboriginal space company, and we're out there, we're proud, and we predominantly service the defence industry, but we're out there, and there are businesses able to participate."
Yeah. How did you get to here? So you're in the Air Force and then you did project management. What's your personal story?
Yeah, so I started straight out of high school into the Air Force as an air traffic controller. And I had a pretty varied air traffic control career. I ended up with Parawings from the parachute training school. I ended up with diving qualifications from the Navy when I was posted to HMAS Canberra. So I posted around the country and did a variety of different activities. Most of the stuff you wouldn't expect a typical air traffic controller to be doing.
Action man, yeah. I don't know if I like an air traffic controller jumping out of a plane saying, I'll guide you in.
Yeah. Well, it was an interesting time for me as the only Air Force officer turning up to parachute training school and the rest of the Army looking at me going, "What are you doing here?" Fortunately, I had a couple of friends on the course and they put their arms around me and looked after me. But no, I always wanted the military experience, and a lot of that was getting out of my comfort zone and trying something new. Post-military service, I ended up at a construction company building infrastructure overseas, and then I ended up as a project manager at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, doing a very similar role, building infrastructure overseas. So that was my sort of professional career, if you would. As a project manager, as a construction manager, I'd be sourcing or working with our supply chain for materials and stuff like that, and coordinating logistics overseas. As a DFAT project manager, I would definitely be very engaged in the procurement section of how we're leveraging our panels, our open market tenders and bits and pieces like that, and developing I guess those opportunities for work. From there, I ended up starting a number of different consultancies and try my hat to see where I land. And today you find me at Gunggangji Aerospace, and I'm really proud to be there.
I can see a link in that early career because my understanding of air traffic control, which I know a little bit about, is about systems and processes and making sure everything's accurate. So to go into procurement, which is about system and processes, I guess there's a link. What did you learn about suppliers from being in that procurement role? What makes a good supplier? What makes you throw the pen at the wall and say, no, that's just not right? What did you learn?
So for me, I think one of the most important things I learned, and this is as being a business owner as well as a supplier, is communication and the ability to resolve problems collaboratively. And that word and the communication piece is always important because as a project manager, typically working in austere overseas environments, things will go wrong. And that doesn't mean that anyone's to blame. Sometimes there are, but things will go wrong, and that's fine. I need you to communicate with me about what's going on. And now that works for me as a supplier up the chain. What I think clients value a lot from me and the services we provide is this really transparent, open communication about what's going on. But also as a client facing down to my supply chain, if there's a delay, tell me what's going on. How can I help? What else can I pull, or what else could I get on with instead of waiting for you to deliver something, etc.
I think it's a really good point, Daniel. I spent some time running freight businesses out of various places, including Darwin and Southeast Asia. And when you're dealing with businesses, you kind of say the plane broke down, so your freight's not going to be here for a while. They say, "What the hell? What happened to the plane?" And the answer is, "I don't know. I don't know. It just broke down. That's what you need to know." Whereas when you speak to a professional, an expediter or a professional procurement person, you say, "Plane's down. We're going to have trouble getting it to you on time." They lean in towards the solution. They start saying, "Okay, what can we do now?" And I think it's incumbent on everyone who's running a business to realise that as a supplier, you've got to get ahead of this and start being honest and talking and communicating.
Yeah, and if we were to relate that back to, I guess, the profession of air traffic control.
Oh, nice link. All right, go ahead.
Believe it or not, things go wrong every single day in the air. and you have to have a bias for action. And the bias is, oh, geez, I shouldn't have descended that aircraft to that level because there's someone else there. I shouldn't have turned the aircraft that far. And when you identify there's a problem, fix the problem. Watching the problem and watching the airplanes get closer and closer is only going to put airplanes closer together. So identify the problem, fix the problem, move on with the day.
You know, because I fly a lot, I prefer to think that there's never, ever any problems in the air and it all goes perfectly all the time. Have you seen that joke where the pilot writes in the logbook, there's signs of oil leakage on engine 2, and the repair person says, "Okay, remove the signs of engine leaking." You just don't want to think. You don't want to think about these things. Do you think supply and being a supplier differs across industry? Is it different when you're in construction from, say, aerospace or defence?
I think there are regulatory differences and there's an expectation change. Whether you're in rail, defence or the resources industry, there's going to be a high standard of entry or barrier for entry. And that expectation of professionalism is definitely going to be there. But I think that comes with that responsibility to communicate and be an active member of solving complex problems. These aren't easy industries to be a part of. So how are you actually demonstrating value through communication as well as your product or service?
Yeah, this bias to action, which I kind of like. It could be the name of this podcast. Yeah. Do you know much about Indigenous Procurement Policy? Many large contractors have in their contracts with suppliers that this, and also with their contracts to the main buyer and IPP. Usually it's sort of government or an industry requirement. And the IPP is described as to stimulate Indigenous entrepreneurship, business and economic development. So that's a grand idea, but are you able to talk about IPP?
Yeah, absolutely. So IPP is the worst acronym that's getting around in federal government procurement because there is the Indigenous Procurement Policy, which is a National Indigenous Australians Agency policy. And then there's also Indigenous Participation Plans. So the IPP, as part of a federal government tender, they'll ask for a schedule, which is your IPP, your Indigenous Participation Plan. So there's always a little bit of which IPP talking about, right? So the IPP, as you alluded to, is there to stimulate First Nations economic opportunities. And the history of that is First Nations people were kept out of the economy for such a significant period of time that there hasn't been the opportunity for generational wealth to be transferred across. So as an example, my dad, when he passed, it gave me nothing now. It's not an insult to him. He lived and worked really, really hard, but it's a function of his life. On the flip side, as a emerging successful entrepreneur, I'm looking forward to being able to build up a bit of wealth and hand over, which has been supported by things like the IPP. So what is it? It's a policy that's set out by NIAA that stimulates or has minimum mandatory requirements on large value contracts. So contracts over $7.5 million, there will be a requirement for First Nations participation in the program. Now, that's for federal government, and state governments have their own as well. So understanding the environment or the context that you're working, whether it's Queensland, New South Wales, Western Australia, they're all going to have their own policy, and tenders will have requirements baked in. But also resources industries, particularly the mines, will also have their own self-driven requirements about First Nations participation on their program as well. Now, that's not a federal government policy driving it down. That's a social responsibility that big resources companies have taken on.
When I was working in the resource sector, in supplier improvement, there was often a section written into the procurement plan that said if you are an Indigenous business, there'll be a weighting towards your application. So I'm a small business, I'm a small Indigenous business, and I can't match the price of a multinational. So we'll build a weighting in there so that we'll try and add up that between the weighting and your offer, it still comes up to 100 points, similar to the multinational. My point to those Indigenous businesses was that's just a weighting. Underneath that weighting, in the other 80%, if you like, you still have to be able to deliver in full on time. You still have to have good quality. You still have to deliver what you offer, et cetera, et cetera.
100%. Yep. 100%. And I've always said to young businesses that I've been mentoring, the IPP is a hand up, not a hand out. It is a way to give yourself an X factor, but you still have to have a credible value proposition, whether it's to the Commonwealth or whether it's to a prime, a head contractor, managing contractor. You still have to have a value to offer other than just being a First Nations business. And if you look across the First Nations business industry, there are incredible companies all over Australia doing just that are starting to trade not on IPP or on programs just because of the IPP. They're trading on programs because they've got technical capability. And I think it's something as Australians we should all be proud of, that there are young businesses emerging that are out there doing some pretty deadly stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question. Are there good examples? What's a good one look like?
So one of the best businesses that I'm really fond of and I follow quite closely is Bridgman. They're a construction company, Queensland-based. Adam Sirota is their chief executive officer, and they're an emerging construction company that shows a real promise, a dedication to actually delivering high quality construction services. But as I watch the enterprise is starting to pivot into different manufacturing areas as well. So whether it's now, I've worked in construction. I'm not a technical construction person. So, they're manufacturing steel. They're doing all sorts of other sort of manufacturing to supplement their construction enterprise as well. And so I look at that and go, there's a really, really strong example of a business that's out there that is proudly Aboriginal, but is also delivering high quality products in Queensland. To give a second example would be the Centre for Applied Technologies in Alice Springs, so CFAT for short. CFAT have a huge property that they have satellite antennas on. And so entities like NASA or Australia's Geoscience Australia or other enterprises are out there renting land and building satellite antennas. So the big ones you see that you think about, and they're actively involved in the space industry. Further, they have active apprenticeship programs like Bridgman, bringing young mob up through their enterprise for jobs and growth opportunities.
Yeah, and for anyone listening who doesn't know that, there is actually a deep space base outside Alice Springs run by the Americans, although no one will ever agree to that, except that despite when you land in Alice Springs Airport, there's US military aircraft on the ground there, and people in town work there. But no, it's not as nothing to see here. Yeah, well, they're two good. They're two very good examples. We should go to a break. Before we do, tell me something about yourself. Did you have a favourite place overseas? Where did you like working the most?
Southeast Asia was always a favourite. It was the local trades who always had the most interesting trade craft when they turned up to site. Quick example, we need to shut off this circuit. And instead of going to the switchboard and switching the switch, it was just a fork into the PowerPoint to mine and my foreman's horror as it shut down and off we went.
I love dealing in Southeast Asia. It was a wild place. I did some business in a place called Balikpapan in East Kalimantan, one of the Indonesian islands near Borneo, and talking to the expat managers of the mines and hearing the things that go on with the locals. It's just a scream, just hilarious. Such a different culture, but they get the work done. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about supply chains.
If you have supply chain or business improvement challenges, contact AI Group's Business Improvement and Growth Hub. The Big Hub is a library of practical and relevant resources designed to assist member businesses to grow and improve. The Big Hub also includes an extensive network of experienced, pre-qualified business improvement consultants. For more details, contact big@aigroup.com.au. That's big@aigroup.com.au.
Daniel, we first met when you were doing some training for suppliers for me on how to market their business to defence. Want to talk to me for a little while about what businesses need to do to work in structured supply chains? How do they structure themselves and how do they market themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think although this is a marketing to defense program that I deliver, it's really industry agnostic. Suppliers need to understand their value proposition. I'm currently doing my executive MBA at the University of Melbourne, and value comes up all the time. And it's not value in terms of dollars and cents. It's how are you solving my problem, and what is the problem to be solved, or what is the job to be done. So think of your customer as having a pain point. This is a very quick summary of it. They've got a pain point. What are you doing as a supplier to solve that pain? Whether it's a service or a product, my product is better, or my product will support you because it solves this pain. Now, that pain might be quality. It might be time. I can get this product to you quicker. It might be a range of different. It might be risk. It might be it might be that communication thing we spoke about earlier. I'm a good supplier. I'm 5% above the market, but I will communicate with you 20 times so that you know that this part is coming on time and on budget. There's a variety of different things. How do you create that value proposition to your customer?
One of the things that buyers often tell me is that they want suppliers that are like us, where we've got the same DNA. We understand. So, the ones in manufacturing are always very focused on quality. They need quality and they need it on time because that's of the production lines. That's what you're saying, isn't it? The value is about understanding who your customer is.
And it's cultural alignment. So manufacturing would be quality. Aerospace would be quality, right? It's you don't want defunct parts or half-finished parts on the aeroplane you're about to take off on. And you could argue that for any industry, everyone wants high quality products. Where is the cultural alignment? Because maybe communicating too much in a particular industry is going to be off-putting. Like, I'm busy, just give it to me. Tell me it's going to be there, and it turns up. And if there's a problem, that you communicate then. You as the business owner, we talk about this in a little section in the presentation about business development. It's your responsibility to understand that culture. This is you trying to participate in someone else's market. What are you doing to be front and center? And what do you want to be known for? So I'm supplier A. What do I want to be known for by that customer? I'm on time, I'm reliable, high quality. Cool. Well, what are your business actions doing to align what that customer sees with you?
Yeah. I love what you're saying. I agree entirely. It's this alignment between what I'm saying, what I'm doing, and what you want to buy. You can fill all the people some of the time, but you can't fill the buyers for very long.
Yeah, completely agree. Get banned out pretty quickly.
Yeah, and then and then it gets ugly really fast, because you've got to have it all in alignment. Bringing this back to Indigenous, what do you say to Indigenous companies when you're trying to help them get to that stage? My experience, and it might just be my experience, is that they are nervous about trying to understand multinationals.
I mean, multinationals always have horrific barriers to entry, right? So again, same thing, resources, defense, anything. The barriers to entry when you go, I'd like to be part of your supply chain, and the email you get back is 50 documents where you're documenting your HSE again, you're documenting your quality policies, right? And that can be off-putting not only to First Nations businesses, any small business looking at it going, is this worth my time? For First Nations businesses specifically, I think there's other elements that are at play for First Nations entrepreneurs as well about country, culture, and community. So there's these other stakeholders that sit behind First Nations entrepreneurs, and not everyone. I'm not saying that this is everyone's experience, but for a lot of entrepreneurs I've spoken to, is what am I doing for country? How am I giving back to community? And how is this culturally aligned with who I am, my people, and my story, and stuff like that? And almost an additional responsibility.
But it can work because you've got good examples of bringing those two things together, looking after my own culture, but also connecting with these crazy rules of the multinationals.
Yeah, 100% it can work. And we're on board with multiple defence primes. We've had a lot of success there and working on some really, and obviously I'm not allowed to talk about them, some really innovative programs. But just to talk about, I guess, First Nations position in the market as well, Dr. Michelle Evans from the University of Melbourne recently released a report called the Indigenous Economic Power Project Snapshot. And I'll send you the link, James, so you can put it up.
Yeah.
But basically, she describes the First Nations economic contribution in Australia as a $16 billion economy is the First Nations economy in Australia, with over $4.2 billion out in wages, 116,000 employed, over 13,000 First Nations enterprises. And so there is a subsect of enterprises that are there that are ready to be part of supply chains.
Taking on from the other side, taking on as so I want to implement an IPP, be it IPP or IPP, and I want to get involved in the engaging with the Indigenous economy. What do I do, Daniel? Help me understand what I need to do to engage.
Yeah, so if I had a couple of rules of engagement, it would be number one, don't be transactional. There are, and this is where there can be a little bit of a rub point, because functionally capitalism and commercialism can be really, really transactional. But I think there's a lot of enterprises that are looking for genuine engagement. If you're actively reaching out, reach out early. Your capture plan and lead times for some of these big procurements, you'll know months or years in advance. Well, what are you doing to promote these opportunities in your existing supply chains, let alone just a new one? Now, that's typically for procurements and tenders, which is where my mind immediately goes to, because there's been a few opportunities where Gunggangji Aerospace turns up to a project startup and they look at Dan and they say, Dan, what artwork are you going to make for us?
What?
And I'm like, come on, bruh. Like, there's a little bit more to here than, and there's some space stuff in my experience that I haven't sort of
kind
touched
of a variation of
earlier,
mansplaining, isn't it? The Indigenous guy turns up, so we want some dot paintings.
Yeah, can you do the acknowledgement and do the artwork for us? Give us a team name. So, what was I trying to say there? So, there are.
How do businesses engage with an IPP? So, first one, recognise that they're businesses. I guess what you're saying, not Indigenous business. They are a business. Yeah.
They're a business. They're an enterprise. I'd say just like any small business or any business, like there's typically an owner there who's and I come from small business, right? So my brain always goes to small business, but small business, right? It's me putting food on the table for my babies at home. So we spoke about, I've got young kids. It's me taking them to soccer on weekends. That is small business in a supply chain lifestyle. It is hand to mouth. So when you're looking at payment terms and you're looking at, you're asking your small business to invest in a whole bunch of R&D or put these complicated procurements together to be a part of your supply chain or stuff like that, like there are barriers to small business that can really, if there's no economic return on or return on investment from that time, can be really harmful to a small business. In terms of engaging into your supply chain, resources are available to you. That the first one, the biggest well-known one, is Supply Nation. And I'm sure James can put a link into the description as well. That is a register of businesses across Australia that have been endorsed by the independent not-for-profit Supply Nation. So I think there's thousands of businesses on that site. A Supply Nation registered business, 50% First Nations ownership. Certified business is 51% or more. I'd also
just to be clear, Supply Nations is an organisation. There's also a brand name. You can look it up, but it's an organisation that has all these businesses that you can access, and you can go to them and say, "This is what I'm looking for," and Supply Nations will be able to connect you. It's like a dating service.
Yeah, well, I mean, Supply Nation is a database. It's a free, public-facing database that you can type the service you're looking for, whether it's painting, construction, aerospace. You can go in there and see the services that are on offer and reach out to the companies directly. There are Indigenous chambers of commerce in each state. So for New South Wales, for example, there's the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, and they would also be an enterprise that you could reach out to, and they've got a number of members that they certify independently of Supply Nation as well, that they're able to work with. And then there's also opportunities to just reach out to someone and have a yarn. And I say this all the time, like mob talk, like the First Nations industry in Australia, we all know each other. And I say that with an asterisk, like we know most of each other, right? And every time I go to a trade convention, like I meet a new family member or someone who knows my family or something like that. I'm like, oh, righto, yeah, what have they done? So there's always, if there's someone in your ecosystem or in your circle or someone that you're connected to, I mean, my details will be in this. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Like someone reached out to me the other day asking for something. Now I'm going to see if I can find it just while we're talking. They were asking for something very specific about aviation or space, and I connected them into a whole bunch of stuff with the Space Industry Association of Australia. And it's just a network, right? It's how do we, particularly with my defence hat on, create better outcomes for defence or the Commonwealth? But, how can we also, I don't need to take everyone's work. Like, yeah, that brother over there, he's flying drones. Like, go talk to him. Or I know a really good consultancy in Western Australia. Go and talk to them.
Yeah, I think there's some great points there, Daniel. Well done. First off, if you're thinking about engaging with an Indigenous business, don't automatically assume that it's some sort of, little business somewhere. It could be Gunggangji Aerospace, which is run by a guy with executive master's degrees and big world experiences, and it's not.
Oh, and I want to put a satellite up. I want to put a satellite.
Well, do you have a painting on it? That's terrible. So first off, don't make assumptions. It's a business. Treat it like a business. And the second, we understand that there actually is a network there. If they can't do the business, they might be able to put you onto someone who can. And the third one is to start engaging with these organisations that help this happen. New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, and the whole lot. Supply Nations is a great organisation. I've been to their offices in Sydney and had many meetings there. This has been a great chat. Thank you, Daniel. You're doing the executive MBA. What's the big lesson coming out of that for you? What didn't you know? That's what I found when I did my my masters. I always found something I didn't know. It surprised me.
Yeah, if I took a couple of different lessons out, there was in terms of marketing, what is the job to be done? So for any activity that you're going to go and do, what is the job to be done by that activity? What is the intended effect? And you can think about that in a military context of what is the effect that you're trying to do by committing to a course of action. The other one from strategy was always about what has to be true. So you can make a whole bunch of assumptions. You can put a strategy together and bits and pieces like that. And a strategic question that sits at the end of that, what has to be true to make that hypothesis correct? So I prophesize that I'm going to grow by 20% next year. Okay, well, what has to be true? The IPP needs to still be active. Defence spending needs to be stable or increases and bits and pieces like that. So you can start to build. It's another way of flipping the question of or testing inherent assumptions. What has to be true for this to occur?
Good lessons. Very good lessons. We should go. Hey, are you serious? You want to put a satellite? You want to put a satellite up?
Yeah, 100%. Owned by me.
Where from?
What do you mean? Where am I going to launch it from?
Yeah.
We
can launch from Australia now, can't we?
We can. So Gilmore's just starting, which is a Queensland business based out of Bowen. They're getting ready to do some more testing. Equatorial launch is obviously up in Arnhem Land. And I'm pretty sure Southern Spaceport is getting pretty close to doing some more of their testing as well.
Staggering. This is fantastic stuff. Yeah.
It's an emerging industry.
Yeah.
And if I was to give everyone a little, I know we're in supply chain, don't think that aviation and space, I say this to all young brothers and sisters who I pitch traineeships to, aviation and space isn't just about pilots and astronauts. There are so many jobs and so many contributing factors into aviation space that all of your suppliers can be a part of. And so I think one of the easiest ones is SpaceX, right? SpaceX, when you look at them, there's a whole bunch of construction and yes, there's space and there's rockets and stuff like that. But there's a whole event management industry has come out of space when they launch the rocket and they film the rocket and there's presenters there talking about space and bits and pieces. Like, that is a spin-off out of space that I almost could have thought of 20 years ago until SpaceX started to make space really sexy. Yeah. So it's just something to think about. Whatever you're doing, how could you apply that to space?
There's a website, I forget the name of it, but if you type in something like low orbit spacecraft or something like that, there's a GPS thing that shows you all of the low orbit satellites that are up there, and there's thousands of them. There's thousands. You might put it in the show notes. It's been a great discussion. We started off talking about National Reconciliation Week, and we ended up talking about your plans to launch a satellite. What a great conversation. Didn't see that coming.
Awesome. Thank you, James.
Been great having you on the show. Happy National Reconciliation Week. And please come back when you're ready to launch your launch your satellite. Let's talk about that.
Thank you, my brother.
Well, that's it for another episode of Supply Circles. Thanks again to everyone for listening, and thanks for your feedback. If you have any feedback on today's interview with Daniel, or ideas for the show, or just want to give me some feedback, hit me up at james.scotland@aigroup.com.au or head over to my LinkedIn page. I'd love to hear from you. Check out the show notes because there's going to be a lot of crunchy stuff in there for you to review, and we'll be back in a fortnight with more business improvement insights into the keys to building sustainable supply chains. Thank you for joining me. This is Supply Circles. I'm James Scotland. Bye for now.